Hi guys, in the quiet hours before sunrise, the Nile River moved through the darkness with a slow and steady sound. The water did not hurry. It carried small boats, drifting reeds, and the cool air of the night. Along its banks stood villages of mud brick houses. Their flat roofs held sleeping families, baskets, and jars. The stars were fading, and the eastern sky was beginning to pale. Ancient Egypt was a land of sunlight, river water, dust, and routine. For most people, life was not a story of kings or pyramids. It was a story of waking early, working hard, sharing food, caring for children, and resting when the heat finally softened. The great monuments that survive today were built by hands that grew tired. Those hands belonged to farmers, builders, fishermen, potters, servants, scribes, and laborers. Imagine standing beside the Nile at dawn. The air is cool for a little while. Birds move through the reeds. Someone nearby is grinding grain between heavy stones. Another person is carrying water from the river. A donkey waits patiently beside a path. The smell of damp earth rises from the fields. This was the beginning of the day for countless Egyptians. The river shaped nearly everything. Each year the Nile flooded and spread dark, fertile soil across the land. Farmers watched the water closely. When the flood receded, planting began. Wheat and barley were the most important crops. Flax grew for making linen. Vegetables filled small gardens near homes. Date palms provided shade and fruit. For a farmer, the rhythm of the year was tied to the river. Some seasons were busy with planting. Others were filled with weeding, repairing tools, or waiting for crops to grow. During certain periods, men might leave their villages to work on state projects, carrying stone, digging canals, or helping build temples and tombs. Most homes were modest. Mud bricks were made from Nile mud mixed with straw and dried in the sun. Walls were thick to keep out heat. Windows were small. Floors were hard-packed earth. Furniture was simple. A low bed, a stool, a chest for belongings, and woven mats were common. Inside a house, the air could become warm and still. Cooking often happened in a courtyard or near a hearth. Smoke drifted upward. Bread baked in clay ovens. Pots simmered slowly. Children moved in and out of doorways. Chickens scratched in the dust. Breakfast was not elaborate. Bread and beer formed the foundation of the Egyptian diet. The beer was different from modern beer. It was thick, nourishing, and often cloudy. People drank it daily. Bread came in many shapes and qualities. Wealthier households ate finer bread. Poorer families ate coarser loaves made from rougher grain. A farmer might eat bread with onions, garlic, or dates. Fish from the Nile was common. Meat was less frequent for ordinary people, though festivals and special occasions could bring richer foods. After eating, work began. The sun climbed higher. Fields stretched green beside the river, but beyond them lay the desert, bright and dry. The contrast between fertile land and barren sand was one of the defining sights of Egypt. A few steps could take a person from cultivated earth into open desert. In the fields, labor was constant. Men and women carried baskets, pulled weeds, tended irrigation channels, and harvested grain. The work was physical and repetitive. Backs bent. Hands hardened. Feet grew tough from years of walking on dirt and stone. Water had to be moved carefully. Irrigation channels carried Nile water into fields. Workers opened and closed small barriers to direct the flow. Too little water meant poor harvests. Too much could damage crops. Managing water was one of the most important tasks in Egyptian agriculture. Heat became a companion by late morning. The desert sun could feel heavy on the skin. Linen clothing helped. Most people wore light garments suited to the climate. Sandals protected feet, though many laborers sometimes worked barefoot. Sweat mixed with dust. Shade became precious. In towns and cities, the day sounded different. Workshops filled narrow streets with noise. Potters turned wheels. Metal workers hammered copper and bronze. Carpenters shaped wood. Stonecutters struck limestone and granite with steady blows. A scribe sat in a quieter space. Scribes were among the educated few. They learned to read and write complex scripts. Their tools were simple but valuable: reeds for pens, palettes for ink, and sheets of papyrus. They recorded taxes, inventories, letters, legal matters, and religious texts. The life of a scribe was physically easier than that of a field worker, but it required years of training. A young apprentice practiced signs repeatedly until his hand became steady. Mistakes were corrected. Lessons were memorized. Writing opened doors to administration and government service. Merchants moved through markets carrying goods from many regions. Grain, fish, linen, pottery, oil, incense, and tools changed hands. Boats brought cargo along the Nile. Donkeys carried loads over land. Trade connected villages, towns, and distant territories. Yet even in busy places, daily life remained grounded in routine. People bargained, repaired tools, prepared meals, and worried about harvests. Children played with simple toys. Elders sat in shaded areas and talked quietly. As noon approached, the heat could become intense. Work slowed when possible. A shaded wall, a tree, or a covered courtyard offered relief. People drank water or beer and rested briefly. The air shimmered above stone and sand. Imagine a laborer returning home during the hottest part of the day. His shoulders ache from carrying baskets of earth. Dust clings to his skin. He steps into the dimmer interior of a mud brick house. The thick walls provide some relief from the sun. A family member hands him bread and a drink. For a few moments, the world grows quieter. Then the afternoon begins again. Builders working on large projects faced especially demanding conditions. Whether constructing temples, tombs, walls, or monumental statues, they worked in teams. Stones were cut, transported, and positioned with careful coordination. Ramps, sledges, ropes, and human strength did the work that machines would do in later ages. Many workers were not slaves in the way modern imagination often assumes. Large state projects relied heavily on organized labor drawn from the population. Workers received food, clothing, and housing. Their lives were still difficult. Injuries were common. The work was exhausting. But it was part of the economic and social system of the kingdom. Near a construction site, the sounds of labor echoed through the day. Stone scraped against stone. Supervisors called instructions. Workers pulled together on ropes. Dust rose into the air. In the distance, the Nile continued its slow movement. Women carried significant responsibilities within households and communities. They prepared food, managed domestic tasks, cared for children, produced textiles, and sometimes worked in markets or estates. Egyptian women generally held more legal rights than women in many other ancient societies. They could own property, make contracts, and inherit wealth. Daily life, however, still demanded long hours of labor. Textile production was especially important. Flax fibers were spun into thread and woven into linen. The process was repetitive and time-consuming. Hands worked steadily at spinning and weaving while conversations drifted through courtyards. Children learned by watching adults. A farmer's child learned farming. A craftsman's child learned a trade. A scribe's son might enter scribal training. Childhood existed, but responsibilities arrived early. As the afternoon stretched on, shadows slowly lengthened. The worst heat began to ease. Farmers gathered tools. Boats returned to shore. Market activity slowed. Animals were fed. Smoke from cooking fires appeared above rooftops. Evening meals were simple for most families. Bread remained central. Stews, vegetables, fish, and occasional meat provided variety when available. Families ate together when they could. Conversation moved through the room while daylight faded. After sunset, darkness came quickly. Oil lamps and candles provided limited light. Homes glowed softly. Outside, the night air felt cooler and more forgiving. The sounds of insects and distant voices carried through the streets. For many Egyptians, this was the most peaceful part of the day. People sat on rooftops or in courtyards to catch the breeze. The Nile reflected moonlight. Boats moved quietly through the darkness. Temple chants might drift across the water from a distant sanctuary. Religion was woven into everyday life. Gods were not distant ideas. They were present in homes, temples, fields, and river journeys. Small household shrines held offerings. Festivals filled streets with processions, music, and food. Priests performed rituals to maintain harmony between the human world and the divine. The grand temples that survive today represented only one part of religious life. Ordinary people prayed for health, good harvests, protection, and family well-being. Illness, childbirth, and death were constant concerns. Medical knowledge existed, but many diseases remained mysterious. Life expectancy was shorter than in the modern world. Injuries could become dangerous. Infections were common. Yet life was not lived in constant fear. Most days were ordinary. People laughed, argued, traded, worked, married, raised children, and grew old. The extraordinary moments remembered by history were surrounded by countless ordinary evenings beside cooking fires and riverbanks. Imagine lying on a flat roof at night after a day of labor. The stone or packed earth beneath you still holds some warmth from the sun. Above you, stars spread across the sky. A faint breeze moves from the river. Nearby, someone speaks softly. A child has already fallen asleep. In the distance, a dog barks once and then is quiet. This may have been one of the simplest comforts in ancient Egypt, cool night air after a day of heat. The next morning would arrive early again. Before sunrise, people would rise, wash, eat, and return to their work. The river would continue flowing north. Fields would need tending. Records would need writing. Bread would need baking. And so the rhythm of Egyptian life continued, season after season, generation after generation, along the narrow green ribbon of the Nile. To understand what it felt like to live in ancient Egypt, it helps to imagine not a single dramatic event, but thousands of ordinary days. The feeling was often physical. Sand between the toes. Sun on the shoulders. The weight of a water jar carried from the river. The rough texture of linen. The smell of fresh bread. The ache in the back after bending over fields or carrying stone. It was also a life of dependence on the Nile. The river brought fertility, transportation, food, and connection. Without it, the surrounding desert would have made large-scale settlement nearly impossible. Egyptians knew this deeply. Their calendar, agriculture, and economy all followed the river's cycles. When the Nile rose, people watched carefully. When it receded, they planted. When harvest came, communities worked together to gather grain that would sustain them through the year. Good floods meant abundance. Poor floods brought anxiety. The landscape itself shaped emotion. Green fields ended abruptly at the edge of the desert. Palm trees marked settlements. Beyond them stretched open sand and rock. Travelers crossing the desert faced heat, thirst, and long distances. Most people stayed close to the river valley where life was possible. Even the great cities were never far from the Nile. Water was always central. Boats moved people and goods more efficiently than roads. A journey by river connected distant communities in a way that overland travel often could not. At night, the river could feel almost timeless. The current moved quietly in the dark, carrying reflections of stars and lamps. Fishermen checked nets. Boatmen secured their vessels. Temple walls stood silent beside the water. The desert beyond remained still. For an ordinary Egyptian, the world was smaller than ours, but it was full. Family, village, temple, field, and river formed the center of life. News traveled slowly. Seasons mattered. The condition of the crops mattered. The health of family members mattered. These concerns filled most days. And as the centuries passed, countless lives followed this same gentle pattern of labor, rest, worship, and sleep beneath the white Egyptian sky. Long before the famous monuments were weathered by time, before foreign empires arrived, before historians wrote their books, there were mornings beside the Nile that looked much like any other. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Donkeys carried baskets. Children chased each other through dusty alleys. Fishermen pushed small boats into the water. Women carried jars on their shoulders. Scribes prepared their ink. Farmers checked the level of irrigation channels. The ordinary day was the true foundation of ancient Egypt. For most people, comfort was simple. A little shade in the afternoon. A full grain jar after harvest. Healthy children. A steady river. A cool breeze after sunset. These small things mattered more than the distant affairs of rulers. Even in large cities, the experience of life remained deeply physical. Streets were narrow and dusty. Houses stood close together. Animals moved among people. The smell of bread, smoke, fish, mud, and sweat blended together. Markets were busy but familiar. Neighbors knew one another. Daily routines repeated with only gradual change. At times, festivals broke the routine. Temples opened their processions. Music filled the streets. Offerings were made. People gathered to celebrate the gods. Food and drink became more plentiful. These occasions provided moments of joy and community amid the steady rhythm of work. But eventually the festival ended. Lamps were extinguished. The crowds dispersed. Morning returned, and the familiar tasks began again. In this way, life in ancient Egypt was both demanding and deeply ordered. The river rose and fell. The sun crossed the sky. Bread was baked. Fields were tended. Children grew. Elders passed away. New houses were built from the same mud that had built the old ones. Generation after generation lived within this cycle. And somewhere beside the Nile, in the quiet before dawn, another day was beginning. The sky slowly brightened from deep blue to pale gold. Birds stirred in the reeds. Water lapped softly against the shore. A farmer reached for his tools. A baker prepared the oven. A scribe unrolled a fresh sheet of papyrus. The desert waited beyond the fields, silent and bright. Ancient Egypt awoke once more. For those who lived there, this was not history. It was simply life. The first light of morning spread slowly across the Nile Valley, touching the tops of date palms and the flat roofs of mud brick homes. The air still carried a little coolness from the night. It was a brief and welcome gift before the sun began its long climb. In many villages, people were already awake. A woman stepped quietly into a courtyard and began preparing grain for the day's bread. The grinding stone felt familiar beneath her hands. She had used it thousands of times before. The sound was low and steady, almost blending with the distant calls of birds waking among the reeds. Nearby, a child rubbed sleep from tired eyes. The morning was calm. For a few moments, the demands of the day had not yet fully arrived. Across the village, smoke began rising from cooking fires. Small flames flickered beneath clay ovens. The smell of baking bread drifted into narrow pathways between houses. Donkeys shifted their weight patiently. Goats wandered near walls. A rooster called into the growing light. The village itself seemed to wake slowly, almost like a living thing. Mud brick houses stood close together. Their walls carried the color of the earth itself. Over many years, sun and wind had softened their edges. Some homes were simple and small. Others belonged to families with greater means. Yet most shared a similar appearance from the outside. The interiors remained cool compared to the bright world beyond their walls. Thick mud brick helped keep out some of the heat. During the hottest months, this difference could feel precious. A family gathered for a simple meal before work. Bread was broken and shared. Beer was poured into cups. There might be onions, figs, dates, or vegetables from a nearby garden. The food was not luxurious, but it provided energy for the long hours ahead. Conversations were often practical. There were crops to discuss, tools needing repair, family matters, news from neighboring villages, the condition of the river. Life moved according to these concerns. Soon people began leaving their homes. Sandals brushed against packed earth pathways. Baskets were lifted onto shoulders. Tools were gathered. The day was underway. For farmers, the journey to the fields was usually short. The Nile Valley was narrow compared to the vast desert surrounding it. Fertile land stretched alongside the river like a long ribbon of green. Beyond it lay sand and stone. The fields carried their own quiet beauty. Rows of crops caught the morning sunlight. Irrigation channels reflected pale gold skies. Water moved gently through carefully managed pathways. The scent of damp earth rose into the air. Farmers knew every corner of these fields. They understood where water collected, which areas dried first, where weeds appeared most often, which soil produced the strongest harvest. This knowledge came not from books but from years of observation. Many people worked alongside family members. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, brothers, and sisters all contributed according to their abilities. Labor was rarely solitary. The work of one person supported the entire household. As the sun climbed higher, activity increased everywhere. Along the riverbanks, fishermen prepared their nets. The Nile provided an important source of food. Fish appeared regularly on the tables of ordinary Egyptians. Some fishermen worked from small boats. Others stood in shallow water near the shore. Their movements were practiced and efficient. A net cast too quickly might tangle. A net cast too slowly might miss its chance. Patience mattered. The river rewarded those who understood its rhythms. From a distance, the boats appeared almost motionless upon the water. Reeds swayed nearby. Birds schemed across the surface. The scene felt peaceful, though the fishermen themselves worked hard throughout the day. Further downstream, boatmen guided cargo vessels carrying grain, pottery, linen, stone, and countless other goods. The Nile served as Egypt's great highway. Long before roads connected distant settlements effectively, the river linked communities together. A journey that might take many difficult days over land could be completed far more easily by water. The river carried not only goods but ideas, stories, and news. A merchant arriving from another region brought more than merchandise. He brought information. News of harvests, temple festivals, changes in administration, rumors from distant cities. In this way, the Nile connected the lives of millions. As the morning continued, workshops filled with activity. Potters sat beside spinning wheels, shaping wet clay into bowls, jars, and storage vessels. Their hands moved with remarkable precision. Small adjustments created entirely different forms. Nearby, kilns waited for finished pieces. The heat inside these structures could be intense. Even before midday, sweat gathered on foreheads and arms. Yet the work continued. Pottery was essential to daily life. Food storage, cooking, transportation of goods, and household tasks all depended on clay vessels. A successful potter created objects that became part of countless ordinary moments. A jar holding water. A bowl containing grain. A vessel storing oil. Simple things, yet deeply important. Elsewhere, carpenters shaped wood into furniture, tools, and boat components. Good wood was valuable in Egypt. Large forests were rare. Much timber had to be imported from distant regions. Because of this, skilled carpenters worked carefully. Mistakes wasted precious material. The scent of cut wood mixed with dust and warm air. Hammering sounds echoed through workshops. Sawdust settled on floors. The work required concentration and patience. Stoneworkers faced different challenges. Granite, limestone, and sandstone demanded strength and endurance. Chisels struck repeatedly against stone surfaces. Tiny fragments scattered with every impact. Hour after hour, workers shaped blocks destined for temples, tombs, homes, and monuments. The repetitive rhythm of tools striking stone became part of the soundscape of Egyptian life. It echoed through generations. For scribes, the day unfolded differently. A scribe's workspace often felt quieter than a workshop or field. Papyrus sheets rested nearby. Ink palettes remained carefully arranged. Records needed attention. Numbers needed verification. Messages required copying. Scribes occupied an important position within Egyptian society because administration depended upon written records. Grain harvests were counted. Taxes were recorded. Property ownership was documented. Religious texts were preserved. Without scribes, the machinery of government would struggle to function. Yet even their work could become tiring. Long hours of writing strained hands and backs. Eyes focused closely upon detailed symbols. The labor was mental rather than physical, but it was labor nonetheless. As noon approached, sunlight became brighter and harsher. Shadows shortened. Stone surfaces grew hot beneath bare hands. Dust hung motionless in the air. The desert beyond the fields shimmered beneath waves of heat. For many workers, this was the most difficult period of the day. Energy faded. Movements slowed. Conversations became shorter. People sought whatever shade they could find. A wall. A tree. A simple shelter. Any relief was welcome. Meals taken during these hours were practical and filling. Bread remained central. Vegetables added variety. Fish provided protein. Dates offered sweetness. Water and beer helped replace moisture lost through sweating. People understood exhaustion intimately. Ancient Egyptian life demanded physical effort from most individuals nearly every day. The modern idea of leisure would have seemed unfamiliar to many ordinary workers. Yet moments of rest still existed. A laborer sitting quietly beside an irrigation channel. A fisherman pausing to watch birds crossing the river. A mother resting briefly after finishing morning tasks. These small pauses carried real value. The afternoon unfolded slowly beneath the heavy weight of the sun. In homes, domestic work continued. Water needed carrying. Food required preparation. Clothing needed repair. Children needed supervision. The household itself functioned almost like a small workshop. Every member contributed. Even young children often had responsibilities appropriate to their age. Life encouraged usefulness from an early stage. As children grew older, they learned the skills that would shape their futures. Some learned farming. Others learned weaving. Some assisted craftsmen. A fortunate few entered scribal education. Learning often happened through observation. A child watched. Then copied. Then practiced. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next through daily experience. There were no formal classrooms for most people. The world itself served as the classroom. A workshop. A field. A riverbank. A kitchen courtyard. These places taught valuable lessons. As afternoon gradually softened toward evening, the light changed. The harsh brightness began to mellow. Long shadows stretched across fields. The river reflected warm colors. Birds returned toward nesting places. Workers sensed the approach of rest. The final hours of labor often felt longest. Tired muscles ached. Feet felt heavy. Shoulders stiffened. Yet tasks still needed completion. Tools were gathered. Animals were secured. Harvests were stored. Boats were tied along riverbanks. One by one, people began making their way home. The atmosphere changed noticeably. The urgency of work slowly faded. Village paths filled with returning workers. Families reunited after long hours apart. Children ran toward parents. Neighbors exchanged greetings. The smells of evening cooking spread through the air. Bread baked once again. Vegetables simmered. Fish roasted over small fires. Smoke drifted upward into the darkening sky. These evening hours often carried a sense of relief. The worst heat had passed. The demands of labor temporarily ended. For a short while, people could simply exist together. Many families spent time outdoors after sunset. Roofs provided cooler sleeping spaces during warm seasons. Courtyards gathered relatives and friends. Stories were shared. Conversations wandered gently from topic to topic. The stars appeared overhead. Without modern lights, the night sky seemed vast beyond description. The Milky Way stretched across darkness like a pale river above the Nile below. Children listened quietly. Older voices carried wisdom accumulated over decades. Ancient stories moved through generations in this way. Not through books, but through memory. Through speech. Through repetition beneath starlight. The sounds of the village softened. Animals settled. Tools rested. Cooking fires dimmed. The Nile continued its endless movement through the darkness. Some people remained awake longer. Night fishermen checked their equipment. Temple workers performed evening rituals. Guards watched gates and storehouses. Boatmen prepared for early departures. Yet most households gradually surrendered to sleep. Inside homes or upon rooftops, families arranged simple sleeping spaces. Beds existed in some households. Others slept upon woven mats. Blankets were used when temperatures cooled. Bodies tired from labor rarely struggled to sleep. Exhaustion arrived naturally. Eyes grew heavy. Breathing slowed. The concerns of the day drifted into silence. Above them, stars crossed the sky exactly as they had for countless generations. The same stars watched over farmers planting crops, builders raising temples, scribes copying records, fishermen casting nets, merchants guiding caravans, children falling asleep beside their families. Night after night, year after year, century after century, the rhythm endured. And as another quiet Egyptian night settled across the river valley, cool air moved softly through the reeds along the Nile, carrying with it the gentle sounds of water, distant insects, and the peaceful stillness that came only after a long day of work beneath the ancient sun. Far away from palaces and monuments, in ordinary homes built from earth and straw, thousands of tired people drifted into sleep, ready to wake once more before dawn and begin again with the river, the fields, the bread ovens, the workshops, and the slow enduring rhythm that shaped nearly every moment of life in ancient Egypt. The night remained quiet over the Nile Valley. Most homes had gone dark. The last cooking fires had faded into glowing embers. Voices that filled courtyards during the evening had become whispers and then silence. A gentle breeze moved across rooftops where many families slept beneath the open sky. Above them stretched a vast field of stars. For the people of ancient Egypt, the night sky was deeply familiar. It was not hidden behind bright lamps or distant city lights. It appeared every clear evening in remarkable detail. Constellations drifted slowly across the darkness. The moon cast pale light upon the river. The world seemed larger at night, yet somehow calmer. A farmer sleeping on a woven mat might wake briefly and look upward. The stars would still be there. The Nile would still be flowing. Tomorrow would arrive as it always did. There was comfort in that certainty. Eventually the darkest hours before dawn settled across the land. This was often the coolest part of the day. The heavy heat that ruled the afternoon felt very far away. Stone walls released the warmth they had gathered from sunlight. The desert beyond the cultivated fields rested beneath silver moonlight. Along the riverbanks, reeds rustled softly. Somewhere in the darkness, a boat creaked against its mooring rope. Water touched the shore with a quiet rhythm. The Nile never truly slept. Long before sunrise, a few people were already awake. Bakers often began their work while the stars were still visible. Fresh bread required time and preparation. Grain had to be ground. Dough had to be mixed. Ovens needed heating. The work started early because bread would feed households throughout the day. Inside a simple bakery, the air slowly warmed as fires grew stronger. Flour dust settled onto clothing. Hands pressed and shaped dough. Clay ovens glowed with gentle orange light. Outside, the village remained mostly silent. Only a few distant footsteps disturbed the stillness. Soon others began waking. The transition from night to morning happened gradually. One person stirred. Then another. Doors opened. Water jars were lifted. Animals became active. A donkey brayed somewhere beyond the houses. Birds emerged from nesting places. The sky shifted from black to deep blue. The first faint line of dawn appeared in the east. Ancient Egypt was waking once more. Many people began the day with washing. Water carried from the Nile or stored in jars helped remove dust and sweat from the previous day. Personal cleanliness mattered greatly in Egyptian life. The climate encouraged regular washing whenever possible. The cool touch of water felt refreshing before the heat returned. Fresh linen garments were adjusted. Hair was combed. Simple preparations marked the beginning of another working day. In wealthier households, servants often assisted with these routines. Large estates required considerable labor to maintain. Servants swept floors, carried supplies, prepared meals, and completed countless practical tasks. Their lives were filled with responsibility. Yet even within grand homes, daily routines followed familiar patterns. Food still needed cooking. Water still needed carrying. Repairs still needed making. No household escaped the ordinary demands of life. As daylight spread across the valley, colors slowly emerged. Palm trees stood dark against brightening skies. Fields reflected shades of green. The river became a ribbon of gold beneath the rising sun. The beauty of the Nile Valley often appeared most clearly during these early hours. Before heat and labor filled the day, there was a brief moment of calm. Farmers walking toward their fields might notice it. Fishermen preparing boats might pause to watch it. Children carrying small baskets might feel it without fully understanding. The world seemed peaceful. The air felt gentle. Everything was beginning again. For farmers, the agricultural calendar shaped existence in profound ways. The flooding of the Nile determined opportunities and challenges throughout the year. When floodwaters arrived, they transformed the landscape. Fields disappeared beneath broad stretches of water. Villages watched carefully. People measured the flood's height. Too little water could threaten future harvests. Too much could damage communities. The ideal flood brought life. When waters eventually receded, they left behind rich black soil. This fertile earth was one of Egypt's greatest treasures. Seeds planted in it often produced abundant crops. Farmers understood this gift well. Their livelihoods depended upon it. Planting season brought long days of work. Men and women scattered seed across prepared fields. Animals helped press seeds into the soil. Irrigation channels guided precious water where it was needed. Patience followed. Weeks passed. Tiny green shoots appeared. Fields slowly transformed. The process seemed almost magical, though generations of experience taught Egyptians exactly how it worked. Life emerged from earth and water. The cycle repeated endlessly. During harvest season, villages became busy with activity. Workers moved through fields cutting grain. Bundles accumulated. Dust rose into the air. The smell of dry plants filled the landscape. Harvest required cooperation. Entire communities participated. The work was demanding, but success brought satisfaction. A full harvest meant security. Grain represented survival. Bread represented survival. The connection was simple and direct. Every loaf began in those fields beside the Nile. Once grain was collected, storage became extremely important. Large granaries protected harvests from moisture, animals, and loss. Officials often recorded quantities carefully. Scribes played a major role during these periods. Their writing transformed harvests into numbers and records. They counted, measured, documented, verified. The written word held power because it created order. A record preserved information long after memory faded. In administrative centers, scribes worked steadily at low desks. Papyrus sheets covered with symbols accumulated throughout the day. Ink-stained fingers. Reeds scratched softly against writing surfaces. The atmosphere differed greatly from a field or workshop. There was less noise, less dust, less physical strain. Yet concentration remained constant. Mistakes could create confusion. Accuracy mattered. Many young boys dreamed of becoming scribes because the profession offered opportunities unavailable through manual labor. Teachers encouraged discipline. Students copied signs repeatedly. Some lessons lasted for years. Mastery required persistence. A successful scribe earned respect. But not everyone became a scribe. Most people continued following traditional occupations passed through families. A potter's son often became a potter. A farmer's daughter learned agricultural and household skills. A fisherman taught fishing techniques to children who would eventually work beside him. Knowledge flowed through generations like the Nile itself. Steady, continuous, reliable. In workshops, apprentices watched experienced craftsmen closely. A young potter learned how much pressure to apply while shaping clay. A young carpenter learned where wood might split. A young stoneworker learned how tools interacted with different materials. These lessons could not always be explained through words alone. They were learned through observation and repetition. Thousands of small details accumulated over time. Eventually experience became instinct. Hands remembered what minds no longer consciously considered. A master craftsman might perform a task effortlessly after decades of practice. The movement appeared natural, simple, almost automatic. Yet behind that ease stood years of learning. As the morning advanced, markets grew busier. Marketplaces formed important centers of community life. People arrived carrying goods from nearby villages and distant regions. Baskets filled with vegetables. Fish caught before dawn. Fresh bread. Pottery. Linen cloth. Tools. Oil. Dates. The variety reflected the complexity of Egyptian society. Every object represented someone's labor. Someone planted it, made it, caught it, carried it, sold it. Life was interconnected in countless unseen ways. Market conversations created a constant hum of sound. Voices overlapped. Bargaining occurred. News circulated. Neighbors greeted one another. Children wandered among adults. Animals occasionally added their own sounds to the mixture. The atmosphere felt lively without being chaotic. Most people knew what they needed. Most sellers knew their customers. Relationships mattered. Trust mattered. Reputation mattered. The social fabric of daily life was woven from these ordinary interactions. A merchant who treated customers fairly earned loyalty. A craftsman producing reliable work gained respect. A family known for generosity strengthened community bonds. People remembered such things. In a world where communities remained relatively stable over long periods, reputation carried real weight. By late morning, sunlight brightened every surface. Walls reflected heat. Roads became dusty. Shade grew increasingly valuable. Workers adjusted their pace. The climate demanded respect. No amount of determination could fully ignore the Egyptian sun. Even animals sought shelter whenever possible. Dogs rested beneath structures. Donkeys stood quietly near shaded walls. Birds gathered where water remained available. The entire landscape seemed to respond to the growing heat. For laborers engaged in construction projects, these hours required endurance. Imagine a group of workers transporting a stone block. Ropes pulled tight. Feet pressed against packed earth. Muscles strained together. Coordination mattered more than individual strength. Everyone moved as one. A shouted instruction. A synchronized effort. A slow forward movement. Then another. And another. Progress often came inch by inch. Large monuments emerged through countless small actions repeated over many years. Every stone represented effort. Every wall represented time. Yet the workers themselves were not thinking about distant centuries. They were thinking about today's tasks. Today's meal. Today's fatigue. The immediate realities of life occupied most attention. The future belonged to tomorrow. And tomorrow would arrive soon enough. As noon approached once more, warm air settled heavily across the valley. The Nile continued flowing through it all. Calm. Steady. Unhurried. The same river that nourished crops, carried boats, supplied fish, and connected communities moved silently through the center of Egyptian life. Generations came and went beside its banks. Children became adults. Adults became elders. Names were remembered and then forgotten. But the river remained. Its presence shaped every aspect of existence. Even now, standing in imagination upon an ancient riverbank, one can almost hear the gentle movement of water against reeds, feel the warmth of sunlight rising higher in the sky, and sense the quiet persistence of daily life unfolding once again among farmers, craftsmen, merchants, servants, scribes, and families living ordinary days in the timeless rhythm of ancient Egypt. The sun stood high above the Nile Valley. By midday, much of the landscape shimmered beneath a blanket of heat. The fertile fields remained green, but the air above them seemed to ripple. Stone walls absorbed sunlight. Dusty paths grew warm beneath sandals. Even the distant desert appeared to glow beneath the brightness of the sky. For many workers, this was the slowest part of the day. The body naturally resisted hurried movement. Every task required effort. A basket felt heavier. A tool seemed harder to lift. A journey across a field felt longer than it had during the cool hours of morning. Yet work continued. Ancient Egypt depended upon constant labor. A farmer bent over irrigation channels, guiding water toward thirsty crops. The movement had become almost automatic after years of repetition. He knew the flow of water as well as he knew the faces of his family. Nearby, another worker carried a yoke balanced across his shoulders. Jars hung from either side, swaying gently with each step. The weight pressed down steadily. Sweat gathered beneath the linen cloth around his waist. The rhythm of labor was deeply familiar. There was rarely a need for discussion. People knew what had to be done. They simply did it. In a village near the river, a woman sat beneath a shaded awning while weaving linen. Her fingers moved with practiced confidence. Thread passed through thread. Patterns slowly appeared. The work required patience. Hours could pass while creating a single piece of cloth. Outside, children played quietly nearby. Their games often reflected the world around them. Small figures made from clay. Simple toys carved from wood. Imaginative journeys through dusty streets and courtyards. Childhood existed in ancient Egypt much as it has existed throughout human history. There was curiosity, laughter, learning, moments of mischief, and long afternoons spent observing adults at work. Many children learned valuable skills simply by watching. A young boy might spend years beside his father in the fields before fully understanding every aspect of farming. A young girl helping prepare food gradually learned recipes, household management, and practical knowledge passed down through generations. Lessons were woven into daily life. There was rarely a clear separation between learning and living. The two were the same. As the afternoon stretched onward, activity along the Nile remained constant. Small boats crossed the water. Fishermen checked traps and nets. Cargo vessels moved slowly with the current. The river itself seemed untouched by the heat. Its steady motion brought comfort to those who lived nearby. Many Egyptians spent significant portions of their lives within sight of the Nile. The sound of water became part of memory, part of identity, part of home. Imagine sitting beneath a palm tree near the riverbank. The shade offers welcome relief. A breeze drifts across the water. Reeds sway gently. Birds move among them. For a moment, the noise of work feels distant. The world seems simpler. The Nile often provided these small moments of peace. Not because life was easy, but because the river moved at its own calm pace regardless of human concerns. Nearby, fishermen worked quietly. Their knowledge had been gathered over years of observation. They understood where fish preferred to gather, how seasonal changes affected catches, which stretches of water produced the best results. Fishing required patience more than speed. A net cast too quickly might fail. A fisherman who rushed often returned with less. The river rewarded careful attention. Hours might pass with only occasional movement. Yet such waiting was simply part of the work. Life in ancient Egypt taught patience in many forms. Farmers waited for crops. Builders waited for projects to advance. Merchants waited for shipments. Families waited for flood waters to arrive and recede. Much of life moved according to natural rhythms that could not be hurried. In workshops throughout towns and cities, artisans continued their crafts despite the afternoon heat. A potter carefully shaped clay on a spinning wheel. The material responded to gentle pressure. Too much force could ruin the vessel. Too little could leave imperfections. Years of experience guided every movement. Nearby, finished pots waited in rows. Some would carry grain. Others would hold water. Some might store oil or beer. Simple objects, yet essential to daily life. Without them, ordinary routines became far more difficult. In another workshop, a carpenter smoothed the surface of a wooden stool. The scent of wood filled the air. Tools lay neatly arranged nearby. Each had a purpose. Each represented knowledge accumulated over generations. The finished stool might appear ordinary to someone passing by. Yet its creation required skill, care, attention. Ancient Egyptian society depended upon countless individuals performing such tasks every day. The monuments remembered by history could not exist without the ordinary craftsmen who made daily life possible. As the afternoon slowly softened, shadows began lengthening once more. The light changed almost imperceptibly at first, then gradually became warmer. Golden tones appeared across fields and buildings. The harsh brightness of midday started to fade. Workers noticed. Bodies noticed. The approaching evening carried a quiet promise of rest. Farmers gathered tools. Fishermen prepared to return home. Merchants concluded final transactions. Animals were guided toward shelter. The landscape itself seemed to relax. Dust settled. Voices softened. The pace of movement changed. In villages along the river, smoke once again began rising from cooking fires. The familiar cycle continued. Meals required preparation. Grain needed grinding. Dough needed kneading. Vegetables required cleaning. Fish had to be cooked. The evening meal represented more than nourishment. It represented reunion. After a day spent scattered among fields, workshops, boats, and markets, families came together again. A mother returned from collecting water. A father returned from the fields. Children returned from errands and responsibilities. The household gathered. Conversations flowed naturally. Perhaps someone shared news from the market. Perhaps there was discussion about crops. Perhaps plans were made for tomorrow's work. The topics themselves were simple. Yet these moments formed the foundation of daily life. History often remembers kings. Ordinary people remembered family. As darkness approached, temperatures became more comfortable. People emerged into courtyards and onto rooftops. Neighbors greeted one another. Children lingered outdoors a little longer. The atmosphere felt lighter than it had during the heat of the afternoon. A gentle breeze moved through narrow streets. The smell of bread drifted from homes. Somewhere nearby, music might be heard. Simple instruments accompanied songs passed through generations. Music existed in both grand ceremonies and ordinary households. Not every performance took place inside a temple or palace. Sometimes it was simply people gathering together at the end of a long day. The sounds blended softly with evening life. As the sun moved lower toward the western horizon, the Nile reflected brilliant colors. Gold, orange, soft red. The water seemed almost luminous. Boat silhouettes crossed the glowing surface. Palm trees stood dark against the fading sky. It was a beautiful moment, though perhaps not unusual to those who witnessed it every day. Familiar beauty often becomes part of the background of life. Yet it remains beauty all the same. An elderly man sitting beside the river might watch the sunset quietly. His hands bore signs of decades of labor. Lines marked his face. His memories stretched back through many harvests and floods. He had watched children grow into adults. Watched seasons come and go. Watched the Nile rise and fall year after year. Life in ancient Egypt could be physically demanding, but it also encouraged a deep awareness of cycles. Nothing remained exactly the same. Yet much remained familiar. The river returned. The crops returned. The stars returned. Each season carried echoes of previous seasons. As twilight deepened, lamps began appearing throughout settlements. Small points of light flickered in windows and courtyards. Their glow illuminated walls and faces. Shadows danced softly. The darkness outside seemed gentle rather than threatening. Families gathered close together. Stories were shared. Some tales spoke of gods and ancient events. Others spoke of relatives, local happenings, or memories from years gone by. Not every story needed to be extraordinary. Sometimes the simple stories lasted longest. A memory of a flood. A successful harvest. A difficult journey. A childhood adventure. The passing of knowledge often happened through storytelling. Children listened carefully. Even when pretending not to. Words settled into memory. Years later, those same stories might be repeated to another generation. And so traditions endured. As night settled fully across the Nile Valley, the stars emerged one by one. The sky seemed endless. Without artificial light, celestial patterns appeared bright and clear. Many Egyptians watched the heavens regularly. Astronomy played an important role in calendars, religious observances, and agriculture. Yet beyond practical purposes, the stars also offered wonder. They moved through the darkness with dependable precision. Night after night. Season after season. People found comfort in such consistency. Below those stars, households gradually prepared for sleep. The day had been long. Muscles felt tired. Hands felt worn. Feet ached from hours of standing and walking. Sleep arrived naturally. A woven mat. A simple bed. A place on a rooftop beneath open skies. These were enough. The sounds of the village grew quieter. Conversations faded. Animals settled. Cooking fires became embers. Only occasional noises disturbed the stillness. A distant boat. The rustling of reeds. The soft movement of water. The Nile continued its endless journey through the darkness. For thousands of years, it carried life through Egypt. It witnessed every ordinary day. Every harvest. Every meal. Every conversation. Every birth and farewell. Most of those lives would never be recorded in monuments or royal inscriptions. Their names would fade with time. Yet their days were real. Their routines shaped the civilization that history remembers. And tonight, beneath the ancient stars, as cool air drifts across the quiet river and tired workers rest after another long day, Egypt settles gently into sleep once more, while the Nile flows onward through the darkness, patient and unchanging, carrying tomorrow toward the waiting dawn. The Nile moved through the darkness as it always had. Its waters slipped quietly past villages, fields, temples, and riverbanks worn smooth by countless footsteps. Moonlight rested upon the surface like a pale silver veil. Reeds swayed gently in the night breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a water bird called once and then fell silent again. Most of Egypt slept. On flat rooftops, families rested beneath the stars. In small mud brick homes, tired workers stretched out after long hours of labor. Children slept deeply, their dreams shaped by familiar sights and sounds. The heat of the day had finally faded, leaving behind a cooler air that felt almost soothing against sun-warmed skin. For many people, nighttime was the most comfortable part of life. The work was finished. The tools had been put away. The demands of the day could wait until morning. There was nothing to do now except rest. A farmer sleeping on a rooftop might turn slightly during the night and hear the distant sound of water moving through an irrigation channel. Even while people slept, the systems that supported life continued quietly. The river flowed. Water moved. Crops grew. The world did not stop. It simply became softer. As the hours passed, the moon drifted across the sky. Shadows shifted slowly over walls and courtyards. Palm trees cast dark patterns across the ground. A donkey slept standing near a stable. Dogs rested near doorways. The village seemed wrapped in stillness. Yet before long, the cycle would begin again. Ancient Egyptian life was built upon repetition. Not the kind of repetition that felt empty. Rather, the kind that created stability. The same paths were walked. The same fields were tended. The same bread was baked. The same river was crossed. Day after day. Year after year. Generation after generation. Long before sunrise, movement began again. A baker rose first. The stars still filled the sky as he prepared his oven. The darkness inside the bakery was broken only by firelight. Small flames grew stronger as fuel was added. The clay oven slowly warmed. Dough prepared the evening before waited nearby. The smell of baking bread would soon spread through the village. Fresh bread was one of the first signs that morning was approaching. Nearby, another household stirred awake. A woman stepped quietly into a courtyard carrying a water jar. The air felt cool against her skin. She paused briefly and looked toward the eastern horizon. The sky was beginning to change. Only slightly. A faint line of gray appeared where darkness met the earth. Soon the sun would return. Soon another day would begin. Across Egypt, thousands of similar moments unfolded at nearly the same time. A fisherman untied his boat. A farmer gathered tools. A merchant prepared goods. A scribe arranged writing materials. A servant swept a courtyard. The civilization itself seemed to awaken together. Not suddenly, but gradually. Like a river slowly gaining momentum. As dawn approached, birds became more active. Their calls drifted across the water and fields. The reeds along the Nile rustled with movement. Fish disturbed the river's surface. Life was returning to the landscape. The first sunlight touched the tops of palm trees. Then temple walls. then rooftops, then fields. Golden light spread across the valley. The desert beyond remained quiet and vast. Even after thousands of years, the contrast remains striking. On one side, fertile green land nourished by the Nile. On the other, open expanses of sand and rock. Most Egyptians rarely traveled far into the desert. Life existed beside the river. The desert represented distance, silence, and mystery. Caravans occasionally crossed those barren regions carrying valuable goods. Their journeys required preparation and experience. Water had to be managed carefully. Routes had to be known. The desert showed little mercy to mistakes. Yet trade routes connected Egypt to distant lands. Through them came exotic materials, rare goods, and foreign influences. Most ordinary villagers, however, experienced these connections indirectly. They might see imported items in a marketplace, hear stories from travelers, or encounter unfamiliar goods arriving by boat. Their own lives remained centered upon local concerns. The condition of crops, the health of family members, the success of fishing, the arrival of flood waters, the repair of a roof. These everyday matters occupied most attention. As the morning advanced, activity spread across the fields. Workers moved among crops carrying tools and baskets. The smell of damp soil lingered where irrigation water had recently flowed. Fields required constant attention. Weeds appeared. Channels needed maintenance. Animals sometimes threatened harvests. Agriculture was never passive. Success demanded effort. The Nile provided opportunity, but people still had to work. Imagine standing at the edge of a field during these early hours. The sun remains low. The air is pleasant. Birds move through the sky. Workers speak quietly as they begin their tasks. The atmosphere feels calm despite the labor ahead. This was often the most comfortable part of the day. Many Egyptians treasured the coolness of morning. They understood how quickly it would disappear. By midday, the heat would once again dominate the landscape. For now, however, the world felt fresh. In a nearby village, women gathered around grinding stones. Preparing grain was one of the most common daily activities. The process required strength and endurance. Hour after hour, grain was crushed into flour. The work was repetitive, demanding, and absolutely necessary. Bread formed the foundation of life. Without flour, there was no bread. Without bread, there was no meal. The simple act of grinding grain connected directly to survival. The sound of stone against grain became part of the background music of Egyptian life. It echoed through courtyards every morning. Children grew up hearing it. Parents heard it. Grandparents heard it. Generations shared the same sounds. Nearby, clay jars held water drawn from the Nile. Water was precious even in a land defined by a great river. Carrying it required effort. Storing it required care. Keeping it clean mattered greatly. A broken jar could create real hardship. Because of this, pottery held enormous value. Many everyday objects were treated with respect simply because replacing them required labor. Life encouraged practical appreciation. A sturdy basket. A reliable tool. A well-made jar. These things mattered. Not because they were luxurious, but because they served important purposes. In workshops, craftsmen continued refining their skills. A stoneworker carefully shaped a block destined for a construction project. Each strike of the tool removed only a small amount of material. Progress seemed slow. Yet over weeks and months, remarkable transformations occurred. Large monuments often began as ordinary pieces of stone. The process required patience beyond what many modern people might expect. Nothing happened quickly. Large achievements emerged from countless small actions. The same was true throughout Egyptian life. Fields were cultivated one task at a time. Houses were built one brick at a time. Cloth was woven one thread at a time. Children learned one lesson at a time. Everything grew through steady effort. Perhaps this contributed to the remarkable sense of continuity that characterized ancient Egypt. The civilization endured for thousands of years because daily life itself emphasized persistence. The Nile flooded. People adapted. Harvests came. People worked. Generations passed. Life continued. In larger towns, marketplaces became active once again. Merchants arranged goods carefully. Customers arrived carrying baskets. Conversations filled the air. The smell of fresh bread mixed with dust, fish, spices, and warm sunlight. A visitor entering the market would encounter a rich collection of sights and sounds. Linen cloth hanging from stalls. Pottery arranged in neat rows. Bundles of vegetables. Fish laid out for sale. Dates stacked in baskets. The market represented the meeting point of many different lives. Farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, merchants, servants, and scribes all crossed paths there. Information moved through markets almost as efficiently as goods. News traveled from person to person. A successful harvest. An upcoming festival. A repair project. A family event. Life felt connected. Communities remained closely woven together. Most people knew one another directly or indirectly. Reputation traveled quickly. Kindness was remembered. Reliability was valued. Trust helped daily life function smoothly. As the sun climbed higher, shadows shortened. Morning gradually gave way to another warm day. Yet even as work continued, small moments of beauty appeared throughout ordinary routines. A bird gliding over the river. Sunlight reflecting from water. Palm leaves moving in the breeze. Fresh bread emerging from an oven. Children laughing during a brief pause in responsibilities. These moments were simple. Easy to overlook. Yet they formed part of the texture of life. Ancient Egyptians did not spend every moment struggling. They also experienced comfort, satisfaction, friendship, family affection, quiet enjoyment, the ordinary pleasures of being human. As another day unfolded beside the Nile, workers, families, and travelers moved through familiar routines beneath the bright Egyptian sun. The river continued flowing. The fields continued growing. The villages continued waking, working, eating, and resting. And somewhere along the riverbank, beneath the rustling reeds and the wide open sky, another ordinary Egyptian day slowly carried itself forward, gentle and unhurried, following the timeless rhythm that had guided life beside the Nile for countless generations. Morning gradually matured into day. The coolness that had lingered beside the river began to fade. Sunlight spread across the valley with increasing strength, touching every field, every rooftop, every dusty road winding between villages. The Nile reflected the growing brightness, its surface sparkling softly beneath the clear sky. For most people, the busiest hours were now underway. The sounds of work filled the landscape. A wooden wheel turned somewhere in a workshop. A hammer struck stone in a measured rhythm. Voices drifted across fields. A boatman called instructions to his companions on the river. None of these sounds were unusual. They were the familiar music of ordinary life. In a farming village not far from the water, a man walked slowly along the edge of an irrigation channel. He carried a simple tool over one shoulder. The soil beneath his feet felt warm already, though the day had only recently begun. He paused occasionally to examine the flow of water. A small adjustment here. A cleared blockage there. These tiny actions helped determine whether crops would flourish or struggle. The work seemed simple from a distance. Yet generations of experience lived within such decisions. Ancient Egyptian farmers possessed an intimate understanding of their environment. They observed changes in water levels, studied soil conditions, watched weather patterns. Not through written reports or scientific instruments, but through daily attention accumulated over entire lifetimes. Many people spent decades working the same land. They came to know it deeply. A particular field might belong to one family for generations. Grandparents remembered where floods once reached. Parents recalled seasons of abundance. Children learned these stories while working beside their elders. The land itself became part of family memory. Nearby, women tended household gardens. These small cultivated spaces provided vegetables and herbs that supplemented larger agricultural harvests. Green plants grew within carefully managed plots near homes. The gardens required regular care. Watering, weeding, harvesting. Small tasks repeated day after day. Yet these modest gardens contributed greatly to daily meals. The scent of growing plants mixed pleasantly with the warm air. A few insects moved among leaves. Birds occasionally descended in search of food. Life unfolded quietly here. Away from monuments. Away from royal courts. Away from the events that would later fill history books. This was the Egypt most people actually experienced. An Egypt of routine. An Egypt of labor. An Egypt of families building lives one ordinary day at a time. As the sun climbed higher, activity along the Nile remained steady. The river was rarely empty. Boats of many sizes moved across its waters. Some carried cargo. Some carried passengers. Others belonged to fishermen following familiar routes. The sight of boats had become so common that few people paid them much attention. Yet they represented one of the most important parts of Egyptian life. Without the Nile, transportation would have been far more difficult. A merchant transporting goods between settlements often relied upon the river's current and favorable winds. Large loads that would challenge animals on land could be moved more efficiently by boat. This made trade possible on a scale that helped unite the kingdom. Imagine standing on a riverbank watching one of these vessels pass. Its sail catches a gentle breeze. Crew members move calmly about their tasks. Bundles of goods rest securely on deck. The boat glides through the water with quiet confidence. The scene feels peaceful. Almost timeless. The river seems unconcerned with hurry. Everything moves at a natural pace. Nearby, fishermen continue their work. A net disappears beneath the surface. The water closes over it. Then comes waiting. Patience remains one of the most important skills. The Nile rewards those who understand its rhythms. Fish cannot be rushed. The river cannot be commanded. One must work with nature rather than against it. This lesson appears repeatedly throughout ancient Egyptian life. People adapted themselves to the environment. The environment rarely adapted itself to people. In a larger town, the marketplace had become crowded. The shade of awnings offered some protection from the strengthening sun. Merchants called out to customers. Buyers examined goods carefully. A woman inspected a piece of linen cloth. A man considered a new tool. A child looked curiously at brightly painted pottery. Conversations flowed continuously. The marketplace served as more than an economic center. It was a social gathering place. People exchanged information there. Shared news. Discussed local concerns. Maintained relationships. The community remained connected through such interactions. A person visiting the market regularly might know dozens of familiar faces. The baker. The potter. The fisherman. The merchant. The carpenter. Life was personal. Most relationships existed face to face. Reputation carried tremendous value because communities remained relatively stable over time. People remembered who could be trusted, who worked hard, who fulfilled promises. These qualities mattered greatly. As morning moved closer to midday, workshops grew warmer. Inside a pottery workshop, a craftsman sat beside a wheel turning beneath practiced hands. Clay responded to every movement. Too much pressure could collapse the vessel. Too little could leave flaws. Balance mattered. Years of experience guided each adjustment. Finished pots waited nearby. Rows of bowls. Storage jars. Water containers. Cooking vessels. Objects that would soon become part of someone else's daily routine. A jar carried water. A bowl held food. A vessel stored grain. The craftsman's work entered countless homes. Though most people never considered the process behind these objects, skilled hands had shaped every one. The same could be said for nearly everything surrounding them. Furniture. Tools. Clothing. Boats. Homes. Each represented labor performed by another person. Society functioned because countless individuals contributed their skills. Elsewhere, a stone worker continued shaping blocks beneath the growing heat. Dust settled on clothing and skin. The sound of tools striking stone echoed steadily through the workshop. The work demanded concentration. Mistakes could waste valuable material. Yet there was a certain rhythm to the process. Strike. Pause. Examine. Strike again. Hour after hour. Day after day. Many ancient craftsmen likely spent decades perfecting their abilities. The result was work of remarkable quality. Not because they rushed, but because they practiced patiently. The concept of patience appears again and again throughout life in ancient Egypt. Perhaps the river itself encouraged it. The Nile followed its own schedule. Floods arrived when they arrived. Crops grew at their own pace. The seasons unfolded gradually. People learned to work within these rhythms. There was wisdom in accepting what could not be hurried. As noon approached, shadows became shorter. The heat intensified. The air seemed heavier. Workers slowed slightly. Not because they lacked determination. Because the climate demanded respect. A farmer carrying baskets across a field could feel the sun pressing against his shoulders. A laborer transporting stone could feel sweat gathering beneath linen garments. A merchant walking through the market could feel warmth radiating from walls and roads. Everyone shared the same sun. Everyone felt its presence. Shade became valuable. A palm tree could provide welcome relief. A mud brick wall offered temporary comfort. People learned where cool places could be found. They remembered them. A shaded courtyard. A covered workshop. A breezy riverside location. These spaces became small sanctuaries during the hottest hours. In one household, preparations for the midday meal were underway. Grain had been ground earlier. Bread baked in the morning now rested in baskets. Vegetables were cleaned. Fish prepared. Simple ingredients combined into familiar meals. The smells drifting from the cooking area filled the home. Food represented more than nourishment. Meals created moments of pause. Family members gathered. Conversations resumed. The pace of life softened briefly. A worker returning from the fields might sit quietly in the shade and enjoy a few moments of rest before continuing. The body appreciated such opportunities. Ancient Egyptian life required endurance. People walked long distances. Lifted heavy objects. Worked beneath intense sunlight. Sleep and food were not luxuries. They were necessities. And because life was physically demanding, rest carried a special value. A cool drink. A shaded seat. A gentle breeze from the river. These simple comforts could feel deeply satisfying. Beyond the villages and fields, the desert remained silent. Its vast open spaces stretched toward distant horizons. Few people ventured far into those regions unless necessity demanded it. Most lives remained centered upon the fertile strip created by the Nile. Here was water. Here was food. Here was community. The contrast between river and desert shaped Egyptian thinking for thousands of years. Life and fertility existed beside dryness and emptiness. Green fields ended abruptly at the edge of sand. The boundary was clear. Visible. unmistakable. And perhaps this made the gift of the Nile feel even more precious. As the day continued, the river flowed onward through the center of everything. Past farmers tending crops. Past fishermen checking nets. Past children learning household tasks. Past craftsmen shaping clay and stone. Past merchants arranging goods. Past temples where prayers were offered. The Nile connected them all. A constant presence. A familiar companion. Generation after generation. Century after century. And as the sun climbed toward its highest point and warm air settled across the valley, life continued in its steady rhythm, carried gently forward by work, family, habit, and the quiet enduring flow of the river that had shaped the lives of countless ordinary Egyptians for longer than anyone could remember. By the time the sun reached its highest place in the sky, a deep stillness often settled over the Nile Valley. The morning energy remained, but it moved more slowly now. The heat wrapped itself around the land like a heavy blanket. Bright sunlight reflected from stone walls and dusty roads. The air above fields shimmered softly, making distant objects appear to drift like mirages. For those working outdoors, midday could feel endless. A farmer paused beside an irrigation channel and wiped sweat from his forehead. Nearby, water moved quietly through the narrow trench he had spent the morning maintaining. The sound was gentle, steady, reassuring. In ancient Egypt, water was never taken for granted. Every green field depended upon it. Every harvest depended upon it. Every loaf of bread depended upon it. The Nile's gift reached into nearly every corner of daily life. The farmer watched the current for a few moments before returning to work. There was always something more to do. A bank needed reinforcing. A blockage needed clearing. A section of earth needed leveling. The tasks rarely ended completely. Instead, one task flowed into another. Much like the river itself. Across the valley, workers sought whatever shade they could find. A cluster of palm trees became a welcome resting place. The shadow of a mud brick wall provided temporary comfort. A covered workshop offered relief from the direct glare of the sun. During these hours, people often spoke less. Conversation required energy. And energy was something to be used carefully beneath the Egyptian sun. The sounds of work became quieter. More measured. The steady scrape of a shovel. The turning of a potter's wheel. The creaking of a boat rope. The soft rustle of reeds beside the river. Life continued, but at a gentler pace. In one village, a woman sat near the doorway of her home spinning flax into thread. The work demanded patience and concentration. Her fingers moved almost automatically after years of practice. Thread formed slowly. A little at a time. Minute after minute. Hour after hour. The finished thread would eventually become linen. The linen would become clothing. The clothing would become part of someone's everyday life. Perhaps a farmer would wear it while working in the fields. Perhaps a merchant would wear it while traveling along the river. Perhaps a child would wear it while playing in a dusty courtyard. The spinner would never know exactly where her work would end up. Yet her labor helped support the lives of others. This was true for countless people throughout Egypt. A baker fed a family he would never meet. A potter supplied a village he rarely visited. A fisherman provided food for strangers. Lives intertwined quietly. Most people never thought about the vast network connecting them. They simply performed their duties and trusted that others would do the same. As afternoon approached, the light began to soften almost imperceptibly. The harsh brilliance of noon gradually eased. Shadows lengthened by tiny amounts. The change was so slow that it often went unnoticed. Yet the body sensed it. Workers felt it. Animals felt it. The landscape itself seemed to relax. Along the Nile, fishermen checked their catches. Some days were generous. Others were less so. Such uncertainty was accepted as part of life. No one expected perfect results every day. A fisherman understood that patience and persistence mattered more than luck. He repaired damaged nets carefully, examined knots, replaced worn sections. Good equipment was valuable. Nothing was wasted if it could be repaired. This practical attitude appeared everywhere in ancient Egypt. Clothing was mended. Tools were sharpened. Furniture was repaired. Pottery was reused. Resources represented labor, and labor represented time. Time was precious. Not in the hurried way modern people often experience it, but in the simple reality that every object required effort to create. A broken tool meant additional work. A damaged jar meant inconvenience. People learned to care for what they owned. Meanwhile, children moved through the village carrying small responsibilities. One child fetched water. Another delivered bread. A third helped gather fuel for cooking fires. These tasks were ordinary parts of growing up. Responsibility arrived gradually. Children learned through participation. They watched adults. They copied what they saw. Over time, simple tasks became familiar habits. One day, those same children would become parents teaching another generation. The cycle continued. As it always had. As afternoon slowly deepened, activity in larger towns remained steady. Markets still welcomed customers. Workshops remained busy. The river carried boats in both directions. Yet even in these more crowded places, life moved with a rhythm shaped by nature rather than clocks. The position of the sun mattered. The flooding of the river mattered. The changing seasons mattered. These natural markers guided daily life. A merchant arranging goods beneath a shaded awning might glance toward the sky and immediately know how much daylight remained. A farmer could sense seasonal changes through subtle shifts in temperature, water levels, and plant growth. People lived close to the rhythms of the natural world. The connection was constant, direct, unavoidable. Near one marketplace, a group of workers unloaded cargo from a boat. The vessel had arrived carrying grain from another region. Heavy sacks were lifted carefully onto waiting shoulders. The work required strength and coordination. Each sack represented food. Food represented stability. Because of this, grain held enormous importance throughout Egyptian society. Granaries stored vast quantities. Officials recorded harvest totals. Farmers measured success through abundance. Bread formed the center of nearly every meal. Without grain, life became difficult very quickly. The importance of food shaped many aspects of daily existence. A successful harvest brought relief. A poor harvest brought concern. Families watched crops closely. The condition of fields affected entire communities. The connection between land and survival remained visible to everyone. As the day continued, some workers found themselves far from villages. Herders guided animals across grazing areas. Travelers moved along dusty roads. Laborers worked at construction sites beyond town walls. These individuals experienced a different kind of afternoon. The open landscape stretched around them. The horizon seemed distant. The sun dominated the sky. Yet even here, small moments of beauty appeared. A hawk circling overhead. A breeze moving through tall grass. Cloud shadows passing briefly across the ground. Ancient Egypt was not simply a place of labor. It was also a place of observation. People spent much of their lives outdoors. They noticed details. Changes in weather. Animal behavior. The appearance of plants. The movement of the river. Knowledge often came through careful attention. The environment taught lessons every day. Back in the villages, preparations for evening slowly began. Not because sunset was near, but because many tasks required time. Water jars needed refilling. Ingredients needed gathering. Fuel needed preparing. Households operated according to routines refined through generations. Certain activities happened at certain times. The order created efficiency. Everyone understood their role. There was comfort in familiar patterns. A woman carrying water from the Nile walked along a well-worn path. She had followed this route countless times. Others had walked it before her. Others would walk it after her. The riverbank bore the marks of thousands of feet over many years. Life left quiet traces everywhere. A worn stone step. A smooth section of wall touched by countless hands. A path pressed into the earth through repeated use. The landscape remembered people even when history forgot their names. As afternoon slowly gave way toward evening, the quality of light changed more noticeably. Golden tones appeared. The air felt less oppressive. Workers began looking forward to rest. The knowledge that the hardest part of the day was ending brought its own kind of comfort. Soon tools would be set aside. Soon families would gather again. Soon the evening breeze would arrive from the river. For now, however, the work continued. A final section of field to tend. A final shipment to unload. A final net to inspect. A final record to complete. One task at a time. One step at a time. The civilization we now call ancient Egypt was built through millions of such moments. Not dramatic moments. Not famous moments. Ordinary moments. A farmer clearing a channel. A baker preparing dough. A child carrying water. A fisherman repairing a net. A scribe recording grain deliveries. Most of these moments passed unnoticed. Yet together they formed the foundation of an entire world. And as the afternoon sun slowly began its descent toward the western horizon, warm light spread across the Nile Valley once again, touching fields, villages, boats, workshops, and riverbanks where countless ordinary people continued living their quiet lives, guided by the steady rhythms of work, family, and the eternal flow of the Nile. The afternoon slowly leaned toward evening. Across the Nile Valley, the bright white light of midday began to soften into warmer shades of gold. Long shadows stretched farther across fields and pathways. Palm trees cast dark patterns upon the ground. The river reflected the changing sky, turning from brilliant silver into bands of amber and bronze. For many workers, this was a welcome time. The hardest heat was finally fading. The air still felt warm, but it no longer pressed down with the same relentless weight. Breathing felt easier. Movement felt lighter. The simple act of standing in the open became more comfortable. A farmer straightened his back after hours spent working among crops. The ache in his muscles was familiar. His hands were rough from years of labor. His skin carried the deep color of a life spent beneath the Egyptian sun. Dust clung to his sandals. Sweat had dried and returned many times throughout the day. He looked across the field. The work was not finished. It was never truly finished. But enough had been done for today. That thought alone brought a small sense of peace. Nearby, other workers gathered tools and baskets. Quiet conversations drifted through the fields. The atmosphere felt different now. Less focused on effort. More focused on returning home. The transition happened every evening. The land itself seemed to exhale. Along the Nile, boats were making their way back toward familiar docks and riverbanks. A fisherman sat near the stern of a small vessel, watching the sunlight dance across the water. Nets lay neatly arranged beside him. The day's catch rested in woven baskets. The river looked beautiful at this hour. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Simply beautiful in a calm and enduring way. The surface moved gently. Reeds swayed near the shore. Birds crossed the sky in loose formations, heading toward places where they would spend the night. The fishermen had seen scenes like this thousands of times. Yet perhaps that familiarity made them more comforting. The river was dependable. Its presence anchored life. No matter what happened elsewhere, the Nile continued flowing. Season after season. Year after year. Generation after generation. In villages throughout Egypt, evening preparations had already begun. Smoke rose from cooking fires. The scent of baking bread drifted through narrow streets. Doors opened and closed. Children carried small bundles of fuel. Water jars were returned from the river. Animals were guided toward enclosures for the night. The village slowly transformed from a place of labor into a place of rest. A woman stood beside a clay oven, carefully removing fresh loaves. The warm aroma filled the courtyard. Nearby, vegetables simmered in a cooking pot. A child watched patiently, waiting for the evening meal. Food preparation consumed a significant portion of daily life. Meals did not appear effortlessly. Every ingredient represented labor. Grain had been planted, harvested, transported, ground, and baked. Fish had been caught and cleaned. Vegetables had been grown and gathered. The meal resting on a family table contained the work of many hands. Perhaps this made food feel especially meaningful. There was satisfaction in seeing the results of effort. There was comfort in sharing it with others. As the sun lowered further, people returned home from workshops. A potter brushed dried clay from his hands. A carpenter arranged tools for the following day. A stoneworker stretched tired muscles before beginning the walk home. The sounds of labor gradually faded. Workshops that had echoed with activity all day became quieter. Dust settled. Tools rested. The day was ending. For a scribe, evening brought a different kind of relief. After hours spent writing records and calculations, the eyes felt tired. Fingers stained with ink could finally rest. Papyrus sheets were rolled and stored carefully. The work would continue tomorrow. There would always be more records to keep. More inventories to count. More transactions to document. But not tonight. Tonight belonged to rest. In wealthier households, evening routines unfolded within larger courtyards and more spacious rooms. Servants completed final tasks before darkness arrived. Lamps were prepared. Meals were arranged. The household settled into a quieter rhythm. Yet despite differences in wealth, many experiences remained surprisingly similar. Everyone welcomed the cooler air. Everyone appreciated food after a long day. Everyone looked forward to sleep. The human rhythms of life connected people across social boundaries. As twilight approached, the sky changed color once again. The brilliant gold faded into softer orange. Orange faded into pink. Pink deepened into purple. The desert beyond the river valley seemed almost dreamlike beneath the changing light. Its vast open spaces stretched silently toward distant horizons. The contrast between fertile land and desert remained one of the defining features of Egypt. A narrow green world surrounded by immense dryness. The people who lived there understood this relationship intimately. Every harvest reminded them. Every flood reminded them. Every journey beyond the river valley reminded them. Life depended upon the Nile. Without it, the landscape would be entirely different. As darkness slowly gathered, families assembled for the evening meal. This was often one of the most peaceful moments of the day. Work had ended. The heat had eased. The pressures of labor were temporarily behind them. People could simply sit together. Eat. Talk. Listen. Children shared stories from their day. Parents discussed practical matters. Neighbors exchanged news. The conversations were rarely extraordinary. Most centered on ordinary life. And perhaps that was exactly what made them meaningful. The small details of daily existence often matter more than grand events. A good harvest. A repaired roof. A healthy child. A successful fishing trip. These things shaped happiness far more directly than distant political affairs. Throughout Egypt, thousands of similar conversations unfolded simultaneously beneath the evening sky. After the meal, many people remained outdoors. The air felt pleasant now. Courtyards filled with gentle conversation. Some families climbed onto rooftops where breezes moved more freely. The Nile carried cool air through the valley. After enduring the heat of the day, even a slight breeze felt wonderful. People lingered. There was no rush. Night arrived gradually. Oil lamps flickered softly. Small circles of warm light appeared within homes and courtyards. Their glow illuminated faces, walls, baskets, and pottery. Beyond those pools of light, darkness deepened. The village became quieter. The sounds of daytime disappeared one by one. Markets closed. Workshops emptied. Animals settled. Only occasional noises drifted through the night air. A distant voice. The bark of a dog. The creak of a boat tied along the riverbank. The chirping of insects hidden among reeds. For many Egyptians, these sounds were deeply familiar. They formed the soundtrack of evening. A soundtrack heard countless times throughout life. As the stars began appearing overhead, the sky revealed one of its greatest gifts. Without artificial lights, the heavens seemed vast beyond measure. Thousands of stars filled the darkness. Some shone brightly. Others appeared faint and distant. Together they created a breathtaking view. Children looked upward. Adults looked upward. Elders looked upward. The same stars watched over every generation. Long before the construction of famous monuments. Long after they were completed. The stars remained. A grandfather sitting with his family might point toward familiar patterns in the sky. Stories connected to the heavens passed between generations. Knowledge passed between generations. Memory passed between generations. The continuity of Egyptian life depended upon such sharing. Not everything was written down. Much wisdom traveled through conversation. Through observation. Through experience. As the evening grew later, tiredness settled gently upon the village. Children began falling asleep. Conversations became quieter. The day's labor finally caught up with weary bodies. Sleep approached naturally. No one needed encouragement. Physical work provided its own invitation to rest. A laborer stretched out upon a woven mat. A family settled onto a rooftop beneath the stars. A fisherman listened to the distant sound of water before closing his eyes. The cool night air moved softly across the valley. The Nile continued its endless journey through the darkness. The river had flowed before these people were born. It would continue after they were gone. Yet for this brief moment in time, it flowed beside them. Beside their homes. Beside their fields. Beside their lives. And as the stars brightened above the ancient landscape and the sounds of the day faded completely into silence, another peaceful Egyptian evening settled gently across the river valley, carrying tired workers, devoted families, and quiet villages toward a night of rest beneath the endless sky. The night deepened over the Nile Valley. One by one, the final lamps were extinguished. Small circles of golden light disappeared behind mud brick walls. Courtyards grew quiet. Rooftops settled into stillness. The sounds of conversation faded until only the gentle noises of the night remained. The river flowed on. It moved through the darkness with the same calm patience it had shown for thousands of years. Moonlight shimmered softly across its surface. Reeds along the banks swayed in the breeze. Occasionally a fish disturbed the water before disappearing once more into the depths. For those who lived beside the Nile, these sounds were familiar companions. A child falling asleep on a rooftop might hear the distant splash of water. An elderly farmer resting after a long day might listen to insects singing among the reeds. A fisherman sleeping near his boat might hear ropes creaking gently against wooden posts. These small sounds belonged to the landscape. They became part of memory. Part of home. As the night continued, the air grew cooler. The heavy warmth stored within stone and earth slowly escaped into the darkness. The change felt welcome after the long heat of the day. Many Egyptians preferred sleeping outdoors whenever conditions allowed. Flat rooftops became quiet sleeping places. Families spread woven mats across the surface. Blankets were used when nights turned cooler during certain seasons. Above them stretched a sky filled with stars. Imagine lying there in complete darkness. The village around you is asleep. The air feels comfortable. The smell of earth and river water drifts softly through the night. The stars appear brighter than any city sky could ever allow. There are so many of them that the darkness between them seems almost delicate. For a few hours, work disappears. Tomorrow's responsibilities remain safely in the future. The present moment contains only stillness. For many ordinary Egyptians, sleep arrived quickly. Life demanded physical effort. Farmers spent long days in the fields. Laborers carried heavy loads. Fishermen worked the river. Craftsmen stood for hours in workshops. By nightfall, bodies were naturally tired. There was little need for elaborate bedtime rituals. Exhaustion often provided its own path into sleep. Across the valley, villages rested beneath the stars. The same could not always be said for Egypt's temples. Even during the quietest hours, some activity continued within sacred spaces. Priests maintained rituals according to carefully established traditions. Offerings were prepared. Sacred duties were performed. The temples themselves stood as islands of stone within the darkness. Their walls held the warmth of the day. Their courtyards lay beneath moonlight. Massive columns cast long shadows. For ordinary people, temples represented an important connection between daily life and the divine world. Religion was woven gently into nearly every aspect of existence. A farmer planting seeds might offer a prayer for a good harvest. A mother caring for a sick child might seek divine protection. A fisherman preparing his boat might quietly ask for safety upon the river. Faith often existed not in grand gestures but in small everyday moments. The divine felt close. Present within the rhythms of life. Present within the river itself. As midnight passed, the Nile Valley remained peaceful. The desert beyond seemed even more silent. Far from the river, vast stretches of sand rested beneath moonlight. Wind occasionally moved across dunes. Otherwise, the landscape remained still. Most Egyptians rarely ventured deeply into those barren regions. Their world centered upon water and fertile soil. The desert formed a distant boundary. A reminder of how precious the river truly was. Without the Nile, Egypt would have been entirely different. This understanding existed in practical ways. People saw it every day. The green fields ended abruptly. The desert began immediately beyond them. Life and dryness stood side by side. The contrast never disappeared. Hours passed quietly. Eventually the stars began shifting toward the western horizon. The moon continued its slow journey overhead. Night moved forward almost unnoticed. For sleeping families, time seemed suspended. The worries of work had faded. The demands of tomorrow had not yet arrived. Only rest remained. Then, gradually, the first signs of morning approached. Not sunlight. Not yet. Only subtle changes. The air felt slightly different. Birds stirred among reeds. The darkness softened. The eastern horizon became a little less black. A little more gray. These small changes often went unnoticed by sleeping villagers. Yet the landscape sensed them. Morning was coming. The cycle would begin again. A baker woke first. This happened often. Bread required preparation long before sunrise. Inside the dim bakery, a small fire was lit. Flames flickered against clay walls. The oven slowly warmed. The smell of smoke drifted into the cool air. The village remained asleep. But not for long. Soon another household stirred. A woman rose quietly and adjusted a water jar near the doorway. A man stepped onto the roof and looked toward the horizon. The sky was changing now. Faint color appeared where earth met heaven. Birdsong increased. Animals became restless. The village was waking. Throughout Egypt, thousands of similar mornings unfolded. A fisherman checked his nets. A farmer gathered tools. A servant swept a courtyard. A merchant prepared goods for market. The great civilization often remembered through monuments and kings was, in reality, built upon these ordinary awakenings. One morning after another. One day after another. The routine itself created continuity. As dawn brightened, the Nile reflected pale gold light. Mist occasionally hovered above the water. The river looked calm and almost dreamlike during these early moments. A boat resting at the shore appeared motionless. Palm trees stood quietly against the growing brightness. The world felt fresh, untroubled, full of possibility. For a brief period each morning, before the heat arrived and labor resumed, the Nile Valley possessed a unique tranquility. Many people likely appreciated these moments deeply. The cool air, the soft light, the gentle sounds of birds and water. These were small gifts offered at the beginning of every day. A farmer walking toward the fields might pause for a moment beside an irrigation channel. The water moved silently. The crops awaited attention. The day had not yet become difficult. For now, everything felt calm. Nearby, children slowly emerged from sleep. Some rubbed tired eyes. Others remained wrapped in blankets for a few extra moments. Soon responsibilities would return. But childhood still allowed brief pockets of freedom. A few moments watching birds. A few moments listening to family conversations. A few moments simply existing within the coolness of dawn. Those moments mattered. As the sun finally rose above the horizon, golden light spread across the valley. Fields brightened. Villages brightened. Temple walls brightened. The Nile itself seemed to glow. Another day had begun. Workers moved toward their tasks. Boats pushed away from shore. Markets prepared for customers. Workshops opened. The familiar rhythm returned. Not because anyone commanded it. Not because a bell rang. But because life itself moved according to patterns shaped by nature, necessity, and tradition. The same patterns followed by parents. And grandparents. And great-grandparents before them. In many ways, the strength of ancient Egypt came from this remarkable continuity. People understood their roles. Communities understood their routines. The river provided its steady foundation. Generation after generation stepped into a world that felt familiar. The details changed. People changed. Yet the underlying rhythm endured. As sunlight continued spreading across the Nile Valley, another ordinary day unfolded among farmers tending crops, fishermen casting nets, bakers preparing bread, craftsmen shaping clay and wood, merchants arranging goods, and families beginning their daily routines. No monuments were being dedicated. No great battles were being fought. No dramatic events were changing history. And yet this ordinary morning was just as important. Because most of life was made from mornings like these. Quiet mornings. Peaceful mornings. Mornings filled with simple work, gentle sunlight, and the steady presence of the Nile flowing beside the lives of countless ordinary Egyptians, carrying them forward one day at a time through the endless and comforting rhythm of the ancient world. The morning sun climbed slowly above the eastern horizon, and the Nile Valley began another day. Golden light spread across fields still damp from irrigation. Palm leaves glowed softly as they caught the first warmth of the morning. Birds crossed the sky in loose groups, moving from the river reeds toward feeding grounds. The air remained pleasant for now, carrying the freshness that would gradually disappear as the day advanced. For a little while, the world felt gentle. A farmer walking toward his field could hear only a few sounds. The distant call of birds. The quiet movement of water. The soft crunch of sandals against packed earth. The day had not yet gathered its full momentum. These early hours often felt peaceful in a way that was difficult to find later. Soon there would be labor. Soon there would be heat. Soon there would be responsibilities demanding attention. But not quite yet. Along the riverbank, fishermen prepared their boats. The wooden vessels rested quietly beside the shore, rocking almost imperceptibly upon the water. Nets were examined carefully. Ropes were checked. Baskets were arranged. Years of experience had taught fishermen that preparation mattered. A damaged net could ruin a day's work. A frayed rope could create problems far from shore. Small details deserved attention. Life often depended upon them. One fisherman paused and looked across the river. Morning mist lingered above the water in thin ribbons. The opposite bank appeared slightly softened by the haze. For a moment, the landscape felt almost dreamlike, then the mist began to fade. The sun rose higher. The day continued. In villages throughout Egypt, household routines unfolded according to familiar patterns. Doors opened. Courtyards filled with activity. Cooking fires were lit. The smell of baking bread drifted through narrow lanes. A woman carried grain toward a grinding stone. Another swept dust from a floor. Children moved between tasks, helping where they could. The village seemed to awaken piece by piece. No single moment marked the beginning of the day. Instead, life gradually expanded outward like ripples spreading across calm water. The sounds grew louder. The movement increased. The stillness of dawn slowly gave way to activity. Inside one home, bread dough rested beside a clay oven. The oven itself radiated warmth into the courtyard. Nearby, jars stood against a wall, holding water carried from the Nile. Baskets hung from wooden pegs. Simple tools waited for their next use. Nothing inside the home was especially grand. Most Egyptian houses were practical places. They existed to provide shelter from heat, wind, and occasional rain. Yet within those walls unfolded the most important parts of life. Meals were shared there. Children were raised there. Stories were told there. Families found comfort there after difficult days. The home served as the center of ordinary existence. As sunlight strengthened, workers moved toward fields and workshops. A potter entered his workspace and examined the clay prepared the previous day. The material felt cool beneath his hands. Nearby stood rows of completed vessels waiting to dry. Each one represented patience. Clay could not be rushed. It responded best to careful handling. Too much force could ruin hours of work. Too little attention could create weaknesses. The potter understood these lessons well. His hands carried years of experience. Many craftsmen spent entire lifetimes refining skills that appeared simple to outsiders. A bowl. A jar. A stool. A basket. Such objects often seemed ordinary. Yet their creation required knowledge accumulated over generations. The practical world depended upon skilled hands. Nearby, a carpenter worked beneath a shaded structure. Wood was precious in Egypt. Large forests were rare, and good timber often traveled great distances before reaching workshops. Because of this, carpenters treated materials with care. Nothing was wasted unnecessarily. Each piece of wood had value. The carpenter measured carefully before making cuts. His tools moved slowly and deliberately. Mistakes carried consequences. Patience once again proved useful. The same quality appeared throughout Egyptian life. Farmers needed patience for crops. Fishermen needed patience for catches. Craftsmen needed patience for their work. Parents needed patience for children. The river itself taught patience through its steady rhythms. Perhaps this was one reason ancient Egyptian society maintained such remarkable continuity over long periods. Life encouraged steady effort rather than haste. As the morning advanced, markets became busier. Merchants arranged goods beneath awnings that offered protection from the growing sun. Customers arrived carrying baskets and jars. Conversations filled the air. The marketplace possessed its own atmosphere. Part business, part social gathering, part information center. News traveled quickly through such places. A successful harvest, a wedding, a shipment arriving from another region, a local dispute. People exchanged information naturally while conducting daily affairs. The market connected communities together. A visitor entering one of these spaces would encounter a rich mixture of sights and sounds. Bright vegetables displayed in baskets. Fresh bread stacked upon tables. Fish arranged carefully for sale. Pottery catching the sunlight. Linen cloth moving gently in the breeze. Voices rose and fell continuously. Yet despite the activity, there was little sense of hurry. People expected transactions to take time. Conversation formed part of the process. Relationships mattered. Trust mattered. A familiar merchant often attracted loyal customers. A respected craftsman earned repeat business. Communities were built through such interactions. Elsewhere, scribes began their day's work. Within administrative buildings and temple complexes, records awaited attention. Papyrus sheets were unrolled. Ink palettes were prepared. Reed pens rested nearby. The life of a scribe differed greatly from that of a farmer or laborer. The work demanded concentration rather than physical strength. Hours might pass while copying documents, recording inventories, or calculating grain deliveries. The room remained relatively quiet. Only the soft scratching of pens disturbed the stillness. Yet even this work could become tiring. The back stiffened. The eyes grew weary. The hand cramped after long periods of writing. Every profession carried its own challenges. As the sun climbed higher, the pleasant coolness of morning slowly disappeared. The warmth became more noticeable. Workers adjusted naturally. Some sought shaded areas when possible. Others slowed their pace slightly. The climate shaped daily behavior in subtle ways. People learned to respect the sun. Ignoring it accomplished little. The Nile Valley had taught this lesson for thousands of years. Near the river, children carried water jars along familiar paths. The task required care. A broken jar meant additional work. Spilled water meant another journey. The children walked steadily, balancing their loads as they had been taught. Along the way they passed neighbors, animals, and workers already deep into their daily routines. Life unfolded around them. A baker removing fresh loaves from an oven. A fisherman repairing a section of net. A woman weaving linen beneath a shaded awning. A donkey carrying supplies through the village. Each person occupied a small place within a much larger pattern. Most never traveled far from home. Most never witnessed the grand monuments that modern people associate with Egypt. Their world was local, immediate, familiar, and yet it was rich with meaning. The river, the fields, the market, the family. These formed the true landscape of daily life. As the morning approached midday, the Nile continued its endless journey northward. Boats moved along its surface. Fish swam beneath it. Birds crossed above it. The river remained the quiet center around which everything else revolved. Farmers depended upon it. Merchants depended upon it. Fishermen depended upon it. Entire communities depended upon it. Without the Nile, there would be no fields stretching green beneath the sun. No villages nestled along fertile banks. No harvests filling granaries. No civilization enduring through centuries. The river connected all things. And so, beneath the brightening sky of another ancient day, life continued much as it had for countless generations. Farmers worked the soil. Craftsmen shaped useful objects. Children learned by watching adults. Families prepared meals. Boats crossed the water. Markets welcomed customers. Nothing extraordinary happened. No event destined for history. No moment recorded upon a monument. Only ordinary people living ordinary lives? And in many ways, that quiet routine was the most enduring part of ancient Egypt, carried forward day after day beside the gentle flow of the Nile, beneath the sun that rose faithfully each morning over the timeless valley. As the day slowly fades, the Nile Valley grows quiet once more. The last warmth of the sun lingers upon the mud brick walls. Long shadows stretch across the fields where farmers spent the day tending crops. Boats rest along the river bank. Workshops stand empty. The sounds of labor have drifted away with the evening light. Across the water, reeds sway gently in the cooling breeze. The Nile continues its endless journey through the darkness. It flows as it did for the farmers who planted grain beside its banks. For the fishermen who cast their nets into its waters. For the scribes who carefully recorded harvests. For the bakers who rose before dawn to prepare bread. For the children who grew up running through dusty courtyards beneath the Egyptian sun. One by one, lamps glow softly inside homes. Families gather for simple meals. Voices become quieter. Stories are shared. A child grows sleepy beside a parent. An elder sits quietly, listening to the familiar sounds of evening. Above them, the sky begins to fill with stars. The same stars that watched over ancient Egypt night after night. The same stars reflected in the dark waters of the Nile. The same stars that shone above countless ordinary lives now long forgotten by history. And yet, for a little while, we have walked beside them. We have followed the dusty roads between villages. We have felt the warmth of the afternoon sun. We have listened to the river moving through the reeds. We have watched bread baking in clay ovens and boats drifting quietly upon the water. Not the lives of kings. Not the stories of conquest. But the gentle rhythm of ordinary people living ordinary days. Now the village grows still. The cooking fires become glowing embers. The last conversations fade into silence. Sandals are left by doorways. Tools rest where they will be found again in the morning. The riverbank becomes empty beneath the moonlight. A cool breeze drifts across the rooftops where families settle beneath the stars. The Nile moves softly through the darkness. Patient. Steady. Unchanging. Its waters carry moonlight across the sleeping land. The reeds whisper quietly at the water's edge. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls once before the night becomes silent again. And so the ancient world settles into rest. The fields sleep. The villages sleep. The boats sleep beside the shore. The workers who spent long hours beneath the sun finally close their eyes. Above them, the stars continue their slow journey across the sky. The night deepens. The river flows. The breeze grows softer. And beside the quiet waters of the Nile, beneath the endless Egyptian stars, history gently fades into silence.